Do you believe that a simple accident can completely change the course of a life? Imagine a millionaire tycoon, owner of everything that money can buy, and a humble young woman who only seeks to survive the next day. What do these two have in common? Nothing, until fate forces them to cross paths in a way neither of them could have predicted. What begins with an unexpected bump in the road turns into a journey of love, redemption, and thrilling twists and turns. But be careful, not everything is what it seems. What is the secret that unites these two very different souls? Keep watching, and you will find out. Leonardo Valtieri drove along the Amalfi Coast in his luxury car, a super sports car that cost more than most people would earn in a decade. The landscape was stunning, with steep cliffs and the blue-green sea that stretched as far as the eye could see. But none of this seemed to impress him. With one hand on the steering wheel and the other adjusting the car stereo, he sighed as he listened to a call on speakerphone. "Leonardo, which is more important, doubling your profits or having a little life?" asked the assistant with a teasing tone. Leonardo smirked, but his answer was direct as always. "Money always wins. Life, we can talk about this in my next incarnation." The assistant laughed awkwardly, but before he could retort, Leonardo ended the call. It was his way of saying that he didn't have time to waste on cheap philosophies. He turned up the volume on the radio, where melancholic Italian music was playing. The lyrics talked about finding true richness in simple moments, but he paid no attention. After all, simple moments didn't buy cars like his. As he adjusted the rearview mirror, something caught his attention on the road ahead. A herd of sheep was slowly crossing. Leonardo snorted, slowing the car. "Excellent. Even the sheep are delaying my life." However, when he diverted his attention for a few seconds to curse loudly, he lost sight of the young woman who was walking on the side of the road with a basket of fruit balanced on her arm. When he looked again, it was too late. He braked sharply, but the car skidded a few meters, and the fruit basket flew into the air. The impact was light, but enough to knock the young woman to the ground. Leonardo got out of the car in a panic, his usually cold expression now marked by guilt and despair. "My God, are you okay?" He knelt beside her. The young woman opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the sunlight. Despite the situation, she still managed to mutter something that Leonardo would never have expected to hear. "I knew that the rich trampled on the poor, but I thought it was just a metaphor." Leonardo was speechless for a moment, impressed by her presence of mind even in that situation. He tried to help her sit up, but she groaned in pain. Are you a doctor now, or are you just winging it?" he joked, before losing consciousness. Without thinking twice, Leonardo took her in his arms. She was light, but the weight of guilt seemed to double the effort. He carefully placed the young woman in the passenger seat of his car. The contrast between the luxurious interior and its simplicity was stark. He swallowed hard and sped towards the nearest hospital. On the way, as the young girl moaned softly, he glanced at her. "Don't worry. I'll fix it. I don't know how, but I will." Suddenly she muttered something, half-consciously. "If you're going to get run over, better buy a Bugatti than buy a cart." Leonardo almost laughed, despite the gravity of the moment. He didn't know who that woman was, or how she managed to make jokes in a situation like that, but he felt that there was something about her that he didn't understand, something that intrigued him deeply. When they arrived at the hospital, the medical team rushed to treat the young woman. Leonardo stood at the entrance, unable to look away as they led her inside. For the first time in years, he felt like his life was out of control. "Who is she?" he thought, while the echo of her words still resonated in his mind. Hours later, Leonardo was still sitting in the hospital waiting room, drumming his fingers impatiently on the arm of the chair. The nurse finally came over and he stood up immediately. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, feeling the strange need to know. "He's conscious now, but he needs to rest," replied the nurse. "You can see her for a few minutes, but no stress." Leonardo nodded, feeling a wave of relief. When he entered the room, the young woman was lying down, looking at the ceiling. Her eyes turned to him as soon as he entered. Her expression was calm, but not without a touch of humor. "So, you survived my death gaze," she said, a weak smile appearing on her lips. "Do you remember me?" asked Leonardo, relieved to see that she seemed to be okay. "It's hard to forget someone who ran over me." She laughed softly, but then grimaced, holding the side of her head. "Okay, maybe I shouldn't joke about that." Leonardo couldn't help but smile. There was something disarming about her, a lightness that he hadn't expected to find in such a serious situation. "I'm very sorry. It was my fault. I wasn't paying attention." "Relax," she interrupted him with a slow gesture. "It was time for something exciting to happen in my life. Besides, I think you've already felt more guilt than I want to deal with right now." Leonardo didn't know what to answer. He was silent for a moment, watching her. Despite everything, there was something about her that made him want to stay there, listen more. "What is your name?" he asked. "Aurora. Aurora Mancini." "And you?" "Leonardo Valtieri." Sounds expensive," she said, letting out a smile before sighing. "Listen, Leonardo, can I ask you something strange?" He tilted his head, intrigued. "Depends on how strange." Aurora closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, before looking at him again. "If I don't get better, I want you to marry me. That way at least someone will laugh at my funeral." Leonardo blinked, confused. This had to be a joke, but when he saw her expression, he realized that there was sincerity mixed with humor. "Are you serious?" he asked, crossing his arms. "I am." Aurora smiled sideways. "I don't have anyone in my life who would make this interesting. And you owe me, right?" Leonardo laughed in disbelief. It was the most absurd thing he had ever heard, but something in him felt he couldn't refuse. "All good. If that's what you want, I'll take it. But just for the record, you are the most peculiar person I have ever met. And you are the strangest one. A fair deal." Aurora closed her eyes again, the smile still on her face, as if that brief exchange had lifted a weight from her shoulders. Leonardo stood there, still, thinking about what he had just promised. "I didn't know why I accepted. Maybe it was her way, the lightness with which she treated everything, even at a moment like that. Maybe it was his own fault. He wasn't sure, but something about that promise seemed bigger than any logic could explain. 2 days later, Leonardo found himself standing in the hospital corridor, watching the frantic movement while trying to ignore how surreal what was about to happen was. In the small room where Aurora was admitted, a nurse adjusted makeshift flowers in a glass vase. Aurora, in turn, looked at everything with a gleam of amusement in her eyes. "I never thought my wedding would smell like disinfectant." She laughed, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders. Leonardo entered, holding a small bouquet he had bought on the way. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was the best he had managed in that short space of time. "That's ridiculous, you know," he said, handing over the flowers. "Of course, but I like a bit of absurdity. Makes life interesting." Aurora winked at him. One of the nurses rushed in, adjusting the small space so the priest could perform the ceremony. It was a strange picture, a tycoon in his impeccably tailored suit, a pale young woman lying in a hospital bed, and a priest holding a visibly worn prayer book. "Well, are we ready?" asked the priest, looking at Aurora with a gentle expression. "As ready as you can be to be in a hospital bed," she joked, pressing her hands against the blanket. Leonardo looked at her and felt a tightness in his chest. It didn't make sense, but somehow it felt right. He took a deep breath before responding. "Let's do this." The ceremony started simply. The priest talked about the importance of love and mutual support, although Leonardo knew that wasn't exactly what they had. When it was time for the vows, Aurora let out a short laugh. No need to exaggerate, Father. We already know it's just a formality. She looked at Leonardo, and for a moment her smile softened. But thank you, really. Leonardo leaned slightly towards her, speaking low enough for only her to hear. I keep what I promise, even when it doesn't make sense. Aurora held back her laughter, but her eyes were shining. When they put on the rings, made from string improvised by the nurse, the priest declared, By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Aurora raised an eyebrow, looking at Leonardo. You're not going to run away now, are you? Not even if I wanted to, he replied with a smirk. When the ceremony ended, the nurse took a photo with an old cell phone, and Aurora looked at it with amusement. This is the cheapest wedding album in history. I think my marriage could be entered into Guinness. Leonardo let out a low laugh, but something in his chest was different. As Aurora made another one of her jokes, he realized that this situation, no matter how absurd it was leaving a mark on him. It was as if something in his perspective was changing, slowly but irreversibly. The farm air was unlike anything Leonardo had ever experienced. When Aurora insisted on returning to her home after being released from the hospital, he decided to accompany her, more out of curiosity and concern than any other reason. Now standing in front of the simple entrance, he felt like a fish out of water. The house was modest, surrounded by open fields and a makeshift garden, the smell of wet earth mixed with the scent of fresh plants. Welcome to my mansion with 1 billion stars, said Aurora, getting out of the car with a playful smile. She pointed to the sky. It has a roof that not even you can buy. Leonardo let out a sigh, shaking his head. He was used to marble floors and crystal chandeliers, not dirt floors, and a porch made of weathered wood. Still, something there seemed genuine in a way he couldn't explain. I don't know how you can live here, he commented, crossing his arms as he examined the place. Aurora picked up a basket that was on the porch and threw it over her shoulders with effort. Easy. Here I can breathe. Now come, you have work to do. Leonardo raised an eyebrow. Work? Yes, work. Or do you think these plants grow on their own? Reluctantly following, he found himself in the middle of a field, trying to carry a bucket of water while Aurora, still recovering, supervised with a commanding air. This is ridiculous. Who carries things like that? He complained, trying to balance his weight. Normal people, Leonardo. Welcome to the club. She laughed, leaning on a makeshift staff. At one point he tripped over a rock, spilling half the water on his shoes. Aurora laughed so hard she almost lost her balance. You should have taken off your shoes. There's always a rock in the road, she said, still laughing. He looked at her with an exasperated expression, but couldn't hold back a smile. This was different, uncomfortable, but also strangely freeing. Later, as night fell, they sat on the porch. Aurora pointed to the horizon, where the last rays of the sun were dissipating. That's what keeps me here, she said. The simplicity of knowing that the sun will always rise tomorrow. Leonardo remained silent, observing the colors of the sky. For the first time, he felt that maybe she was right. Maybe there was something in it that not all the billions in the world could buy. Leonardo was helping Aurora take care of the small garden when he heard the sound of an engine approaching. It wasn't just any engine. It was powerful, almost like a roar, and he knew what it meant. As he looked at the entrance to the farm, he saw a luxury car stop elegantly. Alessandra, his ex-fiancée, got out of the vehicle with firm steps and a haughty expression. The expensive dress and heels glistened in the sunlight, completely out of place here. Leonardo, she began, without even looking at Aurora. So this is where you are? You gave up everything for that? Aurora, who was watering the plants, looked at Alessandra curiously, but said nothing. Leonardo wiped his hands on his pants, approaching slowly. Alessandra, what are you doing here? trying to understand what went wrong with you. She pointed around dismissively. Is this what you chose? Dirt, dust, and a farm girl? Aurora let out a low laugh, attracting Alessandra's attention for the first time. You speak as if the earth is not what feeds us. But hey, I'm just a farm girl, what do I know? She went back to watering the plants, clearly amused. Leonardo ran his hand through his hair, feeling the tension growing. He knew that Alessandra wouldn't let it go so easily. Alessandra, you need to understand that this has nothing to do with you, he tried to explain. Of course there is, she retorted, furious. You abandoned our life, our plans, for a bad joke. Aurora interrupted, her tone calm and direct. He didn't drop anything. He is trying to find something you may never understand. Peace. Alessandra laughed in disbelief. Peace. He had everything with me, wealth, status, power. What more could he want? Leonardo sighed, but when he spoke, his voice was firm. What I want is something that no money can buy. Alessandra, for the first time, I feel like I'm truly living. Not because I have everything, but because I learned what really matters. Alessandra stared at him in disbelief, before letting out a bitter laugh. You lost your mind, Leonardo. By the time you realize the mistake you made, it will be too late. Without waiting for a response, she turned and got into the car, speeding away. The silence that remained in the air seemed heavy, but Aurora broke it lightly. She looks great for galas. Too bad it didn't work out. Leonardo laughed, relieved. He looked at Aurora, who was trying to hide her smile. Something in him changed at that moment, something deep and definitive. He walked over to her, took her hand, and knelt down. Aurora raised her eyebrows in surprise. Aurora Mancini, you showed me what it really means to live, not out of compassion, not out of guilt. You are my home. Do you want to be my wife, for real, forever? Aurora looked at him, her eyes teary, before whispering, I thought you would never ask. She pulled him into a hug, and in that moment, under the golden farm sky, they both felt like they were exactly where they were supposed to be.